The United States would completely destroy Russia if war broke out. That is the statement of David Petraeus, former CIA director and four-star general of the U.S. Army. Specifically, in the event that Russia uses nuclear weapons in Ukraine, the United States will lead NATO in launching a coordinated attack and destroy all Russian forces stationed in or around Ukraine. However, General Petraeus did not mention who would win if two military superpowers faced each other in a one-on-one war. Although in reality the war between Russia and the U.S. will certainly break out in a global conflict with the participation of most of their allies, this is still a very interesting question. Does the U.S. have enough strength to kill the Russian bear, or is Mr. Putin planning to break the wings of the American eagle?
All will be revealed in today's video. Now, without further ado, let's start with the most obvious factor that could influence the showdown of the century: the size of the armies of the Russian and American giants. According to statistics from the Global Firepower website, the United States and Russia currently hold the number 1 and number 2 positions in the world in terms of military size. The United States has a total of 1,832,000 military personnel. 1,350,000 of these are active duty military personnel and not active paramilitary units. The majority of them, more than 1 million, are currently serving in the ground forces of the United States military. Besides, the Air Force and Navy are not inferior when possessing the number of soldiers serving in the range of 600 to 700,000 people. Not stopping there, the United States also possesses a lot of modern equipment, including 13,300 aircraft, with 9,975 ready for combat, along with 5,500 tanks and more than 300,000 ground vehicles, 11 aircraft carriers, 92 destroyers, and 02-class submarines capable of launching ballistic missiles. The U.S. military is not only large in numbers but also formidable in every combat environment, whether in the air, on land, or underwater. Meanwhile, Russia currently has more than 1,300,839,000 people on active duty, 250,000 in reserve, and a similar number fighting in paramilitary organizations such as Wagner, which are controlled by Russia. Although the total manpower is not much inferior to the U.S., in terms of Air Force, Russia is falling behind significantly with only 4,182 aircraft and only about half of them are ready for combat. At the same time, the number of soldiers operating in the Russian aerospace forces is only 250,000 people. The army also has about half less ground combat vehicles than its opponents, but can compensate with the number of tanks 12556 and 6,575 self-propelled guns, both of which are the most in the world. The Russian Navy also holds a large fleet of 598 warships, but has only one aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, and 15 destroyers. In addition, although the number of Russian and American submarines is equal, Moscow has an overwhelming number of frigates and minesweepers. From the statistics just mentioned, it is not difficult to see that if the war was decided by the size of the army, the Americans would clearly win because they are overwhelming in quantity and quality, for example, the Navy. However, from history and the present, soldiers and equipment alone will not make victory. Otherwise, the Americans would not have failed in Vietnam and Russia would not have had such difficulties in Ukraine. So, although military size has a lot of influence, it certainly cannot play a decisive role in who will win. Instead, to find the answer we need to delve into other factors, as on the ground both Russia and the United States have similar infantry setups and equipment. For the US, the backbone of the entire armed forces is made up of light infantry divided into airborne and airborne units. Each squad has 9 soldiers with a squad leader and 2 fire groups. Each group consists of 1 leader equipped with an automatic rifle M4 carbine. One person using a machine gun M249, two soldiers using assault rifles with grenade launchers, and a rifleman besides each squad can be equipped with anti-tank weapons at 4 according to mission requirements. In mechanized infantry units we will see the appearance of armored fighting vehicles such as Stryker and Bradley, the most interesting of which is a new generation version of Stryker, now equipped with a powerful 30mm cannon or the Javelin anti-tank missile that is making waves on the Ukraine battlefield with the achievement of destroying a large number of tanks from Russia. Additionally, the US military also possesses a number of medium-range options for destroying enemy tanks, which can be especially useful when it comes to Russian weaponry, which relies on reinforcements and armored fighting vehicles. If the Americans have mechanized squads, on the other side, Russia has motorized rifle units, usually equipped with armored vehicles BMP or BTR, each of which carries a combat infantry squad of 7 people equipped with a pair of PKM machine guns, AK-74M rifles, and an RPG-16 short-range anti-tank weapon. In particular, some units and vehicle models will be supplied and installed with modern Cornet anti-tank missiles with a range of 5.5 kilometers, 2.5 kilometers further than Javelin. However, the Russian motorized rifle units had no weapons comparable to the American Javelin anti-tank missiles, and thanks to that, the Americans had a slight advantage, or at least equal firepower with their opponents. However, Russia is far superior to the United States in the number of infantry it can deploy because the Russian infantry has 3 vehicle platoons and an extremely mobile airborne unit that can put 25% more troops on the front line than the United States. According to Nature magazine, this gives Russia a very high level of tactical mobility on the ground compared to the US light infantry, which mostly operates on foot. Russia can reach its target faster and deploy more troops there. However, transporting troops quickly and in large numbers also has a downside because every time a vehicle is unable to operate for any reason, it means that 1/3 of the Russian squad's combat strength will be lost. On the contrary, the number in the US Army is only about 1/4 because they have too many infantry on foot combined with the superior number of armored vehicles and Javelin missiles, which will help limit the mobility of the Russian infantry.
Of course, this is the era of modern warfare. The infantry of both countries will not fight alone beside them. There will be mortars, artillery, tank fire support from the air. The outcome of the ground war will not only be decided by firepower but also by tactics. In addition, the environment is also a factor that needs to be taken into account. In areas with complex and uneven terrain, the combat effectiveness of the Russian army will be significantly reduced because they depend on means of transportation. On the contrary, they will have an advantage in cold climates, although each side has its own advantage at home. No matter where, the large and well-equipped U.S. Army will put the opponent at a disadvantage. The same story will also take place in the sky where, except for possessing large equipment, the U.S. Air Force focuses on combined operations, mobilizing from 20 to 100 aircraft for a single campaign, usually taking place over a large geographical area, in which some aircraft will perform reconnaissance and support missions while others take on an attack role, thereby creating a multi-dimensional approach to air warfare. Thanks to this, the U.S. Air Force can not only control large areas of land against enemy air forces but also open up opportunities for cooperation with allied air forces, allowing them to participate in integrated air campaigns. According to the assessment, it is highly likely that the U.S. will use this tactic if it confronts Russia alone, especially with the large amount of equipment they possess. Speaking of the quality of weapons, this is another advantage that the United States has over the Russians. Currently, the majority of the Russian Air Force are MiG-29, MiG-31 and C-27 fighters from the Soviet era, all of which are over 40 years old. Although they have been significantly upgraded to meet all the requirements of modern air warfare, they are still like lamps that are about to run out of oil, about to reach the end of their service life, and are about to be transferred to a museum for retirement. Speaking of the quality of weapons, this is another advantage that the United States has over the Russians. Currently, The majority of the Russian Air Force are MiG-29, MiG-31 and Su-27 fighters from the Soviet era, all of which are over 40 years old. Although they have been significantly upgraded to meet all the requirements of modern air warfare, they are still like lamps that are about to run out of oil, about to reach the end of their service life, and are about to be transferred to a museum for retirement. Meanwhile, if we compare, the Americans have been using the F-16 for nearly 50 years, and they are gradually replacing it with a large number of F-35 Lightning II with more than 1,400 being produced and will very quickly supplement the nearly 200 existing ones. This is very likely the trump card of the United States, that can be deployed in an air battle, where they can dominate only thanks to overwhelming numbers and a reasonable strategy. Additionally, the US may assume that Russia may employ similar air tactics to those in Ukraine, and that these tactics would give the US a wealth of air defense options at its disposal compared to the soldiers of the Ukrainian army. From the beginning of the video until now, it seems that the US military is dominating over its opponents, but things will gradually change when the Russian Federation Navy participates in the war. The Russian Navy is larger than the US Navy, and although the US is not inferior, when their ships focus on combat capabilities more than their opponents, the strength of the Russian Navy fleet cannot be underestimated despite the fact that most of them are cruisers and frigates. If they have to confront the powerful destroyers of the US, which have a great advantage in the open sea, Russia can use some large ships and submarines to distract them, and then deploy small ships to the west coast of the US. At that time, the US will be in big trouble, when their coastal cities will become potential targets for the Russian escort and defense fleet. Their speed and agility would also pose a threat to unarmed US merchant ships. However, that advantage would be limited by the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, so Russia would need a naval base near the west coast of the US, and there was no better place than Alaska. With the port of Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky only 400 kilometers from Alaska, the Russian Navy can attack regularly and turn this place into a place to deploy warships. Of course, this is not an easy task because once war breaks out, Alaska, a territory near Russia of the United States, will certainly be strictly protected, making it impossible for small Russian naval ships to easily cross the Bering Strait as easily as if it were a deserted place. Therefore, if Russia wants to control Alaska, it will need to take advantage of its ship numbers in a reasonable way. In addition, according to some studies by the US Navy, the Russian Navy tends to build its fleet in a direction that focuses mainly on strategic deterrence, that is, using warships to keep other forces away from Russian territory instead of actively attacking. However, that does not mean that the Russian Navy's combat power is weak, but only that they do not have the expeditionary capability like the United States. Therefore, the US Army will not easily land on Russian soil by sea. This is a rather smart strategy to limit the numerical advantage of the US infantry. In return, the United States relies on its naval power in the open seas to counter Russia. They can also use their fleet of 11 aircraft carriers to launch airstrikes on Russian ports. The ability of the US Air Force and Navy to coordinate operations seamlessly could help them resist attacks on the coast. Meanwhile, the only area where the two countries are on par is nuclear-powered submarines, and it is with this that Russia may regain some of its advantage that President Putin has reportedly been improving the Russian Navy's underwater combat capabilities over the years since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, with the two crown jewels of the fleet being the Alexander III and the Nyas Posharsky, the latter of which is capable of carrying 16 Bulava intercontinental ballistic missiles, giving it the ability to deliver powerful strikes on US territory. On the other side, the United States is not far behind when all four of their main submarine classes, Virginia, O20, Los Angeles and Seawolf, are nuclear-powered, and in the case of the O20 class, 14 out of 18 ships of this class are capable of launching ballistic missiles to carry out a nuclear first strike. Besides possessing powerful weapons in case the war between Russia and the United States becomes a war of attrition, which prevents a potential end, that will be mentioned. Maintaining reserve energy as well as continuous production of military weapons will be an extremely necessary thing in the United States, which holds the number one position in the arms race for supplying to foreign countries. According to statistics from 2018 to 2022, the U.S. accounted for 40% of total arms exports worldwide while still ensuring adequate national arsenals. The country behind them in second place is Russia with 16%. This can be explained by the fact that they were at war with Ukraine and did not sell many weapons because their forces needed them. Therefore, it is not surprising that the Russians were surpassed by the U.S. Even before the Russia-Ukraine war, the United States sold and produced more weapons than its rivals. From 2013 to 2017, the United States accounted for 33% of arms exports while Russia accounted for only about 22%. The gap, although smaller than in recent times, is certainly still significant. However, if we only look at those numbers to conclude that Russia's weapons production capacity is weak, it is a mistake. In fact, Russia completely accelerates when necessary. However, all of this will no longer matter if one of the two decides to use the most cyber weapon in their arsenal, nuclear weapons. According to estimates from the Russian Arms Association, there are currently about 5,889 nuclear warheads, with 1,549 strategically deployed, more than the total of 5,240 for nuclear warheads and 1,440 for combat-ready warheads of the United States. However, numerical superiority is meaningless because both countries have enough nuclear weapons to destroy the other many times over, which means mutual destruction will certainly come true if one of the two is brave or stupid enough to press the death button. However, if we consider only the speed of firepower, Russia is holding a factor that can tilt the balance of power, which is the RS-8 Sarmat missile. This system will be put into operation in September 2023 and is said to be capable of launching nuclear warheads farther than any other ICBM intercontinental ballistic missile of the same type, up to 18,000 kilometers, and each Sarmat can carry up to 15 warheads of 350 kiloton. With an attack range of 18,000 kilometers means that Russia can activate the RS-8 Sarmat from anywhere on its territory and hit the U.S. mainland, while the U.S. does not have this ability when their most powerful intercontinental ballistic missile, the Minuteman III, only has a range of 13,000 kilometers, an impressive number, far enough to reach Russia, but outdated compared to the Sarmat. Furthermore, according to the U.S. Naval Institute's report, the newly tested Minuteman III is only over 10,000 kilometers, so the range of 13,000 kilometers is just a theoretical name. However, they are also somewhat assured because if one of the two decides to play big with nuclear weapons, the other country will of course retaliate, causing the opponent to die as well, and in the end, the whole world will suffer the consequences. However, if we remove nuclear weapons from the balance of power, the United States generally has a much greater advantage in terms of military equipment and a more advanced air force. On the sea front, the balance will be more balanced as the United States, with its large number of destroyers, will have an advantage in open waters, while Russia's small warships provide greater maneuverability in coastal areas. So can the United States defeat Russia alone? The answer is yes, but it will be very difficult and the consequences are immeasurable because history has proven that Russia is a place where it is easy to go but difficult to return. So what do you think? Leave a comment so we can discuss it with everyone.